Hey there, this is Adam from the team here at Parabola, and in this quick video, I'll be sharing how leading sourcing orgs such as Sonos are using Parabola to automate their most manual, complex data processes without writing scripts or requiring engineering resources. Before we dive into the product, going to share a little bit about why teams choose to use Parabola in the first place. And so, inherent in any sourcing organization is relying on data coming from third parties, such as contract manufacturers and suppliers. And then also, you have internal databases and PLM systems. And in order to create the really essential reports and dashboards your team needs to make decisions, it involves a lot of standardizing these different data sets, consolidating them, creating pivot tables, doing VLOOKUPs, all of the kind of manual repetitive spreadsheet processes that really force operators to kind of feel underwater and really at capacity in their day to day. And now, the larger organizations that we work with, yes, they do have technical resources who are able to come in and sometimes build and deploy solutions for some of these processes. But realistically, it's really difficult to get tech resources dedicated for some of these internal tools. And more so, these processes and requirements are constantly changing, especially when you're working on with third parties. So if a column name changes or the data is now received in a different format, you need to be able to quickly change and deploy new tools in order to automate some of these really complex data processes. And so we at Parabola fundamentally believe that the people who are the closest to the problems and really understand all of the nuanced complexity associated should be the ones actually building and deploying their own software solutions without needing to write complex scripts or rely on engineering resources. To show you a little bit about how Parabola works, this right now is a fully built out Parabola flow, which we will dive into in just a second. First, I'm just going to familiarize you with some of the basics of Parabola. And so, what we'll be showing here is Parabola really has three steps, and that includes steps that are able to pull data in from any data source, steps that can manipulate data the same way you would in a spreadsheet or you could do in code, and then finally can send data out to wherever it needs to go. And so all of that is powered by this search bar that you're going to see here in the top left corner. So that first step I mentioned was our data sources. And so you can imagine if we are pulling from someplace like a CSV file, or we have a contract manufacturer that emails us a BOM every quarter, or maybe we also need to pull data from an FTP folder or a database like Snowflake. Really, wherever that data lives, we can pull it in automatically before we start to do some manipulations of those data. That brings us to our second section here, our transformation steps. So really whatever you can do in a spreadsheet, you will be able to do in Parabola. So think about things like filtering your data, sorting, combining tables together, or maybe stacking different data sets. So you can imagine having a couple different BOM reports that you need to first consolidate and then stack together into one unified data set. From there, maybe you want to do some filtering and need to do some type of math calculation. Hopefully, you can see here, these flows come together pretty quickly and everything's going to be really easily human readable so that really anyone in the organization can build and deploy these automations. Once we've connected all of our manipulations, the last step there is to send this data off. So whether you need to send it to a place like a Google Sheet or email a CSV attachment or push data into a database or send a Slack notification, really can get that data to wherever it needs to go so you can build that end-to-end automation without writing code. In this example that we have here, we are automating a reporting process that involves pulling inventory reports from multiple different 3PLs that all provide the data differently through different systems, and then outputting a couple consolidated roll up reports. So, to give you an example of how Parabola can work with data coming from multiple sources in multiple different formats, in this top card here, which we're using to add documentation and group steps together, you can see we're pulling data from an API here, and we're returning 5 columns that all have the column names that you see here. And now that differs from how supplier number two, or 3PL number two, is providing us that data. In this case, we're pulling data from a 3PL where now we have 11 columns, and all of those column names are going to be different. Once we pull the data in, as we've talked about, we can do those manipulations. So it can do things like adding in a new column for warehouse, can do things like rename columns or add new columns in. So adding an in transit column before renaming some of our column values. So you can see here we're going from the current order that we have here to a new standardized column order across all of our different files. Once we standardize all of these different reports that we're receiving, we can stack those together, do things like some math. And so we want to figure out, hey, what is the total on hand and in transit inventory? And so can type in a simple calculation there. And then we are outputting a couple different reports here so that we're able to see a rolled up inventory report, a consolidated inventory report by warehouse, and then have the ability to visualize some of those results with groupings and calculations in some of these dashboards that you see here. Now that you understand at a high level a little bit about Parabola works, let's talk about how sourcing orgs are deploying Parabola. And so a couple different use cases that you can imagine would involve standardizing bombs from multiple different contract manufacturers. Once you do that, then you can compare a Q3 versus a Q4 bomb report, for instance, and understand how did part costs fluctuate between these quarters, and then how can we negotiate better prices based on that information. We also see a lot of this tie into planning as well. So you can imagine having a sales forecast and a consolidated inventory report where you're doing burn down reporting based on those forecasts that can update pretty dynamically. And Parabola can make sure in real time, as soon as you have a new forecast or updated inventory levels, you can reflect those changes in that final report. You also can imagine reports around how are our contract manufacturers allocating spend? Which parts are they buying from which suppliers and how much are they spending on those in proportion to their total spend across suppliers? And then finally, really digging in on replenishment needs across the organization based on some of those dynamic factors that we discussed. And so if you take anything away from this video, I hope it's clear that anything that happens in a spreadsheet across multiple different data sources where you really need to have logic injected into the process to understand how the data needs to be manipulated and combined so that it's really an actionable result. All of that makes for perfect Parabola use cases to hopefully save you time and provide new technical capabilities to your organization to ultimately decrease cost of goods sold and have visibility across your supply chain. If any of this is interesting or you have any questions, feel free to book time through the link below. Really appreciate you watching till the end here. Have a good one.